It's janwurm, and I'm in my Berkeley studio with David Pruce on January 20th, 2022.
Wow.
And I'm hoping to give some background information on the materials used in a breadth of work that covers nearly 50 years, perhaps even a little bit longer. So to start out with, I'm going to start right in the present. And David, we're in front of a triptych that is from 2021, which is pretty recent. And
2021 is very recent. Yes.
Yes, considering it's January, it's recent. I don't have to worry yet. But this is actually pretty straightforward in terms of paint. It is not a beautiful stretcher bar. It is a stretcher and canvas that is prefabbed. So for a long time, there's a long period of stretchers and canvases that were prepared by John Annesley, who sadly passed away a few years ago. So I have most recently just been buying pre-stretched and primed canvases, but I put an extra layer of gesso on it. So I'm priming them with gesso myself before I start painting. And then just in terms of methodology, I do go in with charcoal. So there is an underdrawing to these that is in the canvas underneath this surface of paint. Now this particular painting, as you can see, has open areas where the canvas
So
is
right
breathing.
here, can you see the charcoal on this hand?
You can see some remnants of charcoal. You can see some very dry paint brushed over very loosely, and also here around the head and here around the shoulder.
And the white here and here, are we actually seeing through to the canvas?
You're seeing the gesso on the you're seeing the gesso on the canvas.
Okay.
So that's all inherent in the work itself. The paint that's used and that I've been using for about 16 years is a French oil paint called Sennelier. The company is Sennelier. It's got some beautiful colors. I personally feel that there's greater fragility to this paint than to paint that I used prior to that. So what I wanted to do also was to actually bring, I'm just gonna, yeah, I'll just bring it right over here and hold it in my lap. See? So this painting actually dates from 1973. So this is just about 50 years old.
Guess. I could tell the period.
You can tell the period. Okay.
I would have probably guessed 70s.
Yeah.
Italian restaurant.
Uh-huh.
Little Tony's maybe.
Uh-huh.
Hanging Chianti.
Hanging Chianti bottles in their raffia baskets, and plastic grape leaves, grapes coming down, bunches of grapes and spaghetti and meat sauce, and the little family. And in a sense, thematically, it hasn't changed very much. The dynamics of the nuclear family are still present in the work. So this painting was actually executed in London, and when I went to London for graduate school at the Royal College, that was a initial change of paint, so that I started using Winsor Newton oil paints.
I remember seeing those around for a long time.
Yes, in fact, I used them for many years, decades, until I switched to Sennelier. So what I liked about this paint is that it's very robust and it stands up. One significant difference is that these paints are mixed with, as far as I understand, my understanding is that they're mixed with linseed oil, which is very common through a number of different brands of oil paints. And Sennelier is different in that it uses safflower oil. And that is so radically different that I've never mixed it with any other paint. And it's not that I mixed paints before, different brands, but from the time I was in London on, I just used Winsor Newton. But I would not want to use other paints if anyone had to work for restoration, simply because I don't know about the oils.
the one from 73,
Yeah.
did you paint it and then attach it to the stretcher?
It's a really good question. So, as you can see, and I will shift this for the camera, this, unlike the others, is not stretched behind the stretcher bar, and this is not standard. What happened was this had been stretched in London on a stretcher bar, properly stretched, and then it had been taken off the stretcher bars, rolled up, and shipped back to the United States. And it was in other hands of someone who went into a framing shop and didn't know and trusted, and the person who restretched it was not to our professional standards, and so they cut it down like this and just stapled it along the edges instead of in the back, so it's not wrapped around. And that's how this occurred. And as you can see, there's some fraying of the edges of the canvas, but all in all, it looks pretty good for being 50 years old.
Yeah.
Well, 49, about to
But
turn 50.
normally you never paint around the edge
No, I don't.
of your paintings.
No, I don't.
So that's why
Yeah.
I thought this had been placed on after painting.
Yes, that was a really good observation. Very good. So there is a period of paintings, and I don't have one to actually look at, that they were done just after coming back from London. So from 1975 to about maybe 78 or so. There was a period of time, and there were some from London also, where after painting with the oil paints, I went in and I drew with oil pastels over the painting on the canvas. So those lines are very distinctive and were a way of activating the surface. Those also have held up well, to my knowledge, and there's been no issue with degradation of the paint surface or the drawn surface. However, like oil pastels anywhere, they can't be touched. So you would smudge them even today probably, I would imagine. So I'm gonna put this back. Thank you.
Okay, so what makes you think that this new Sennelier paint is more likely to degrade than what you've used before? Because obviously it hasn't been around long enough to degrade yet.
Right, so I will, I'd like to just look at a painting over here for a moment, and if we could just take a look at this painting, which is damaged.
Okay.
And it was pretty shocking to see. And if you come in close, you may see it from a distance, but there's actually been light damage to it. And oil paintings generally should
so that whole 1-inch bar along the left side,
Yeah.
almost, not quite to the bottom,
yeah,
but almost.
down to about here.
Down to there,
it
yeah.
narrows down. So I've never seen this in any painting, and I have paintings that I've had for
Why is that line
decades
so
and
sharp? There was
decades.
another painting over it, and there was
Yes.
just one tip that was sticking out into the sun, and the rest was covered by a painting in front of it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So,
Wow.
so I've never seen this with any other paints, and I have paintings that have been hanging on walls in sunlight for decades and decades.
Yeah. Would
20,
plastic
30
wrap
years.
protect it from that?
It
or
had
not?
been wrapped.
It had been wrapped when that happened,
Mhm.
so it needs to be hidden in a deep dark cave
In a
with
deep
the
dark
Sennelier paint.
No, I don't know, because some of the paintings have been up for many years, and I've never encountered anything like this, but it gives me pause.
Yeah.
So the questions, of course, are why to continue with certain products when this happens with certain materials. But I would imagine that this is really an outlier, because as I said, other paintings are exposed all the time. The painting behind.
So there's only this one that you've
It's
seen
the only one I've seen
like this, and you've got others that have been around for a bit. With
These paintings, and there's a red
here?
right there, red and yellow,
Yeah.
and they've been on the wall and exposed to light now for about 3 years.
And you're not noticing any
And
change?
I'm not noticing change. No.
Okay.
But that's an interesting thing about materials, and sometimes they don't perform the way we'd like to, and this is a terrible thing, but in the conceit of the artist here, I've continued to work with certain materials. And one example is over here, and that is a pigment stick, an oil stick. And the brand is R&F. And I first met R&F at a College Art Association annual conference. I believe it was the one in Boston 15, 16 years ago, something like that. It was quite a while ago. And I loved working with them. I loved the hand because, you know, I'm drawing, I'm painting, I'm doing both together. And I worked with them for quite a while. And then at one point, there was some kind of a change. And this, you know, this is not, to my knowledge, a way to, you know, I have no way of explaining it. I certainly talked to the manufacturers, the developers, the owners of the company about this. I seem to be the only person who has this problem, according to them. But for me, they're not drying. They're not ever drying. So that materials that I used, you know, way back 15 years ago, 14 years ago, are still wet and tacky to the touch, and I continue to use them. So
And
one
what's an example of that one?
Yeah, so here's an example of a piece that was done in 2009, 2010. I was working on these, and it to the touch is still tacky, so that if I covered this with plastic to put it aside and took the plastic off, it would be sticking and pulling off paint with it.
Oh my goodness.
So, and 2010 was 12 years ago.
And they say only the climate conditions in your studio lead to this?
I don't know. It gets pretty hot and dry in here, so it's hard to understand how that would happen.
Yeah.
But you know, I did these on canvas. They're maybe a dozen pieces like this, and I've done some on panel. So these are very recent.
These three down here?
These were all done during the pandemic. Now, I had done maybe 12.5 pieces like this, the same material, without any problem. So these were earlier and completely dry. Mm-hmm. There's no tackiness about them at all. So the difference is beyond me. There's no medium used with them. I'm not using or adding any linseed oil and turpentine. With paint coming out of the tube, very often I'll use a mixture of linseed oil and turpentine as a medium. But these are all just directly from the sticks and smeared. And as you can see with this one here, there's also charcoal drawn into it. Yep. So there's charcoal drawn into and over.
So both under and over.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I have these panels, and they do have a layer of gesso that I've put on them, on the wood, on the raw sanded wood. Mm-hmm. I did at one point, just recently, and these are all from this period, from the pandemic, buy some of these. I got these panels that were already primed. So there's a primer on here, a nice, smooth, beautiful gesso that's been applied. On the other
Is there no canvas to this? It's just a pure wooden block?
It's just a wooden panel. Mm-hmm. So, but I have my own layer of gesso that I've added onto it. Okay. I personally like having something that's got a little bit more grip to it, right. And I just kind of slather on
You're
gesso.
A huge fan of gesso. There can never be enough.
Exactly. I love the gesso, and I'm not one for sanding down layer after layer for a smooth eggshell surface.
So if a friend bought you a panel that had been pre-primed and then they gessoed it for you to save you a step. You would still gesso it a third time before you worked on it, right?
I've been caught out here. I don't know. But these drawings, in fact, are a combination of materials of lithographic crayon and gesso and ink and charcoal. And again, I love working with the wet gesso, just as if I were working with paint. One of the distinctions here, and it gets very complicated when I start working on paper and with drawings, is that I just mix everything together. I think I need a little break now.
Okay.